So we're going to talk about love in the face of hate this morning. Um, it's on the top thing on our bulletin. Uh, there's a war going on in Ukraine, and it's definitely sparked a lot of emotions here in the U.S. and the United States as well. There's been a lot of distress, concern, fear. I mean, I don't know if there's another story on the news besides gas prices, and some of that's tied to that as well, right? But I think when we turn it on, we see these numerous atrocities, these bombings of children's hospitals, residential neighborhoods. I think it really, strikes a nerve with us here. And the way that people react here, it's hard to imagine. I mean, it is extremely hard to imagine what it must be like living there. This mighty world power delivering, this pain and this hurt and blowing up your neighborhood, these vulnerable citizens, even attacking refugees during a ceasefire, the victims of indiscriminate bombing. I think we're in the United States, we're pretty blessed in a lot of ways. We have an ocean on each side of us, and our northern and southern neighbors probably would never invade us militarily. But it isn't that way for a lot of people. Many people all over the world, especially in Africa and some Asian countries as well, have had to deal with the constant fear of war, and they've lived through atrocities of war. And we can't even begin to imagine what it's like to truly go through something like that. But I think that we should try, to understand their position, their place. There's so many people who have developed mistrust, fear, anger, hatred against those who they would call their enemies. And you might think to yourself, can you really blame them? Can you really fault them for what they have to endure? Why they're so angry? They make our reasons for getting angry about things seem ridiculous, don't they? By comparison, our complaints, our disagreements, they really pale in comparison to the unbelievable suffering at the hands of cold and calculating machines of war. And, I think when we look at that devastation, we look at that pain and that suffering, I think that that's the proper lens to really think about the times that Jesus was living in as well, right? Jesus was a Jewish man. He was living in a land occupied by a hostile, violent oppressor, right? The Roman government. They were brutal. They were very brutal, and they had very little regard for the lives of anyone except for Roman citizens. That was like Paul's trump card all the time. I'm a Roman citizen. Everybody was like, whoa, don't beat that guy, But it wasn't like that for most people, including Jesus, who was wrongly accused and killed for something that he didn't even do. But the Jewish people, they resented and they hated the Romans, their occupiers. And they, much like the Ukrainians of today, just wanted to be free of foreign oppression. They wanted to live in peace. They wanted to farm. They wanted to worship God, worship their own God. And Jesus came to be a light in a place that was full of this darkness, full of this hopelessness. Jesus called for love and compassion and peace in a time that saw very little of those things. At the same time, Jesus wept for the suffering of his people. He mourned for them, even though they rejected him, even though they rejected their salvation from God. And you can feel his pain and his lament for Jerusalem. Essentially, Jesus was saying that they brought this on themselves. But he's one of them at the same time. right? In Luke 13:34-35, it says, "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those sent to her, how often I wanted to gather your children together, just as a hen gathers her brood under her wings. And you would not have it. Behold, your house is left to you desolate. And I say to you, you will not see me until the time comes when you say, Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." You can feel the pain there, the pain and the suffering. So no matter what the reason is, if you see your own people suffering, you see them dying, see them oppressed, it crushes you, right? And the same thing is true when we look at this suffering all over the world. When we look at the things that are happening in Ukraine, the horrors of what war is all about. But despite the difficult times that Jesus was born into and Jesus lived through, he preached not a message of vengeance and war and anger and all the things that you might think somebody might want to preach about. But his message had to do with peace, had to do with loving people, had to even do with loving people that we hate. And that's a message that I think has resonated with people for thousands of years because there's truth to it. The ring of truth seems to cut through all the garbage and the mess and the darkness. It speaks to us on a really deep and spiritual level, God's truth, his righteousness. We just know that it's right. But that message of wisdom and compassion of Jesus is still a powerful force for good, even today in this world, and even in a place as viciously under attack as Ukraine. I read this story in the news. It was, I think it was in The Sun, which is it's a UK publication. But it shows this bright spot in this place of darkness. It shows the wisdom of Christ and the love of Christ in this place that seems to be filled with only evil. I want to tell you this story because I think it illustrates what Jesus was really talking about when he talked about loving your enemy. Ukraine, 75% of the population of Ukraine believes in Jesus Christ. That might be interesting for you to know. There's a lot of believers over there and a lot of people that have been exposed to God's wisdom. Well, anyway, a lot of Russian troops have become lost and wandering around, separated from the main army over the course of the conflict. I guess there's quite a lot of disorganization with the invasion over there. And they don't have food, they don't have supplies. They're just trapped out there in the middle of nowhere. They have no idea where they're going because Ukraine is a large country, one of the largest in Europe. And a lot of these Russian soldiers get so lost that they just turn themselves in to people just randomly walking around on the street, or people that are farming in their fields, just all kinds of random people. And one such encounter was captured on a cell phone video. A Russian soldier was given a pastry and some tea from the Ukrainian people, from just regular civilians. You can tell, she's got a nice manicure and purple hair, and she's not exactly a military person, right? And he's comforted by these just regular people, right? She even offered to use her phone so that he could call his home and call his family. If you want to watch, there's a little video of it if you want to look it up. But you can see him, and he's drinking his tea and eating his pastry, and he starts crying as he's talking to his family at home. He's just sobbing. When people are under this unbelievable stress and anxiety, when you have a moment of peace and comfort, you just break down, you cry. I remember, I don't want to make you think I'm a wimp or something, but I went through the first week of basic training. And they said, go to church on Sunday. You should go to church on Sunday. I went to church, and I was there, and I could hear the voices of everybody singing hymns, and it just kind of like blew through me. And not only me, but everybody that was with me, that was in my flight. That's what they call it, like a squadron in the Air Force. Everybody was just bawling their eyes out. They were crying. It's just because of the stress. And this guy here, you can't see his tears on his face here, but he's just crying. He was lost. He doesn't know where he's going. He doesn't know what he's doing. And the people in the background, they don't hold a grudge against this guy, but instead you can hear them talking in the background in Ukrainian, saying, these men don't know what they're doing here. They're lost, and it's not their fault. These are their enemies, people that were sent there to kill them. When I saw this story, I immediately thought about the power of Jesus at work in these people that are thrust into this hell on earth, created by evil men that have a lust for power. And I saw the light and the wisdom of Christ at work in this war zone. And it reminded me that we're not just supposed to love those that we like or that we perceive as our friends, but even the people that we perceive as our enemies. And seeing this act of love by the Ukrainians here reminded me of how Jesus said that we should act towards people who would seek to even mistreat us, or people that in our life that we don't agree with or don't like, or give us a hard time, or we might perceive as being an enemy. It's just a good example. I'm going to take you to a passage here that I'm sure everybody has read. But I think when we think about this passage in the context of what is going on over there and what those people did, and the context also of how Jesus was living his life, I think we forget, or we just don't really delve into what kind of life it must have been like to be a Jewish person living in a Roman occupied province, that was basically being farmed for resources and the benefit of other people, and that the people were just seen as a commodity. So let's take a look here in Matthew 5:38 through 48. He says, "You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, but I say to you, do not resist an evil person. But whoever slaps you on your right cheek, turn the other to him also. If anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, let him have your coat also. And whoever forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. Give to him who asks of you, and do not turn away from him who wants to borrow from you. You have heard it said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. For he causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? If you greet only your brothers, what more are you doing than others? Do not even Gentiles do the same? Therefore you are to be perfect, as your heavenly Father is perfect." Those are powerful words, and they must have... Can you imagine how they resonated with a people that was being oppressed, that was being attacked actively? Jesus lived under the imperialist Roman government, and he had some very challenging words for people who were thinking probably only of revenge, right? He says, you've heard it said, hate your enemy, but he says, I tell you, love your enemy. They're must have been consumed by anger and fear. Jesus told people not to give in to that, not to seek revenge, not to seek an eye for an eye. That is, always our first inclination, right? I mean, someone hits you, you want to hit them back, right? You want to get them back 10 times harder. You want to show them, oh yeah, I'm going to show you what you put me through. I'm going to give you a taste of it, right? Give you a piece of my mind, right? That's what all that's about. You want them to feel the same pain and the suffering that you felt from their careless and mean, horrible action, whatever it is they decided to do. You want to sink some of your anger and your rage into them and make them feel what they brought on you. That's a natural inclination. There's a natural inclination and desire in each of us to want to hate, especially our enemies. We want to hold grudges. We want to not forgive people. It's a natural inclination to want to hurt people to get back at them. But Jesus, though, says not to act according to our urges and according to our base desires. He says not to give in to our want for vengeance. But he says instead not to resist an evil person. To be humble, to have a heart of compassion, to have understanding, even for people in the face of evil. I was just thinking about the words that they were speaking as that Russian soldier was there. They don't know where they're going and they don't know what they're doing. They don't know what they're doing here. They were trying to understand them. They were trying to have compassion instead of condemnation. They were having mercy on them instead of trying to take out their frustrations and their anger and their viciousness and feelings of rage on them. They were doing none of those things. Instead, they only sought to help these people, giving them food and drink. You know, Jesus in this passage tells us to turn the other cheek instead, basically to swallow our pride. It doesn't mean to take a punch. That's not really what it means. Anybody who's seen you saw Looney Tunes when you were growing up, you know, with Bugs Bunny, and then in the night, like, you know, smacks him with the gauntlet, and then Bugs Bunny puts a brick in his glove and he smacks him back. Well, it's an insult thing. It's not supposed to be a brick in the glove, but basically it's insulting, right? You know, everybody's heard insults. Everybody's been to public school, right? But that's what it is, you know? But it's like, you know, you can say mean things to me. I'm just going to walk away from it. I'm not going to address that. I'm not going to go down to your level, right? So Jesus also tells us to walk the extra mile. And you know, this one was particularly meaningful as the Romans were allowed to press regular Jewish citizens into service. So they could say, hey, carry my pack for this mile. Well, Jesus is saying, instead of just carrying that pack for a mile, carry it for him for another mile. You know, pour on love instead of just doing the bare minimum, even though this person's taking advantage of you. You know, that's what he's trying to get at. He's like, look at the world differently. Think differently than giving in to what you just would normally do from your gut feeling, from your natural inclination for revenge, or because you're angry or because you hate somebody. Don't give in to that. Change your mind. Think about the world differently. And that's what it means to repent, right? To change your mind. He's telling people to think differently, to think through a lens of love, compassion, mercy, grace. He's saying this is how God looks at you. This is how God sees you. He reigns on the righteous and the unrighteous, right? The sun shines on the righteous, the unrighteous. He loves everybody. His gifts go to all people, even the ones that are bad. In every case, going through all of these things in this passage, there is a single theme weaving through all of it, and that is that humility and love are greater things than anger and revenge. That love really does triumph over hate. Love is superior to hate. That forgiveness is better than holding a grudge. That there's real strength not in killing your enemy, but instead in loving your enemy. That is what takes real strength. Jesus tells us that there is a fight against our evil desire and our corrupt nature. And that fight is there for us to embrace that his wisdom, the power of God. There's this conflict in each one of us. And God is calling to the better parts of all of us. He calls on us to be perfect as our Heavenly Father is perfect. You know, these Ukrainians that I showed you in that picture up there, they loved their enemy. They had compassion and understanding. They fed him. They comforted him. They even used their own personal cell phone so he could call his mom, right? I mean, call his family. And that's what the love of Christ really looks like. You know, it didn't change the war, but it changed that person, changed that person's life. And you know, that kind of attitude, what those people were doing, that should be an inspiration for us as well. If they could drop their grudge and they could stop hating for a moment, people who wished them harm, people who hated them, who wanted to kill them, shouldn't we be moved to forgive somebody when they make an offhand comment or something that we don't like or find offensive? Can you imagine? This guy was here with a gun and military vehicles. He was there to kill them, and they gave him a pastry. How does that make us look when we won't forgive somebody because they make us mad, because they said something that we didn't like? We should be ashamed of ourselves. Shouldn't we love people that we don't agree with? Shouldn't we have compassion or care for a person that might have offended us? Shouldn't we get over that? You know, that's basically what Jesus is preaching in his passage. That's what he's telling us to do. And if people can do that in a war-torn country after they just blew up your hospital, then surely we can do it here for somebody that cut us off on Love Lane. Right? I mean, think about it. Put it in perspective for a minute. They tried to bomb people escaping, you know, after they said they would let them leave. And these people loved them anyway. I mean, it should shame us if we don't forgive people, you know? That's what Jesus meant by the parable about the guy that owed 10,000 talents of silver and he wouldn't forgive $100, you know? That's all of us, you know? And it shouldn't be that way. How can we sit here and hold a grudge against somebody because they said something that we didn't like when people in Ukraine can support and comfort a lost enemy soldier sent to kill them and even help him call his mom? And if God causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and he sends rains on the righteous and the unrighteous, shouldn't we try and strive every day to live by that example? Shouldn't that be our goal? If we want to call ourselves a Christian, shouldn't that be the way that we live our life? If people in a war-torn country can love those sent to kill them, how can we not forgive our brethren and love our neighbors? You know, sometimes the Bible does ask us to do pretty hard things, things that we might not want to do. But when we see those things in action, when we see stuff like that, don't we know deep down that it's right, that it's good, that really is the truth? That's the way life should be. That's the way things ought to be. Doesn't that ring some kind of deep truth? Doesn't that speak to your soul in a way? That love and that compassion, doesn't it? It really does. It's more than just words when you see it. And I encourage you to look it up and watch the video. And you just see him crying and talking to his family. And the people are saying, you know, things to have compassion and understanding on this guy that tried to kill them. And he got lost. And he was vulnerable. And they had mercy on him. When I saw those Ukrainians showing love to a Russian enemy, I knew in my core that this is an example of the type of love that Christ tried to teach us and tells us about in the scriptures. This is God's true wisdom at work. And it is only when people embrace this truth that they can really only then ultimately find lasting, real peace and fulfillment for their life, right? It makes a difference. So, I speak to myself as well when I say this. The next time we are tempted to hold a grudge against somebody or hate somebody, remember Jesus, remember his example. Remember when he said, walk the extra mile, turn the other cheek, to love your enemy. Remember these people that fed this lost and starving Russian soldier and how everything about it just seems right and good, that gives you a warm feeling to your core. And I think it's good to maybe talk about something good that has happened, since, it seems like the news is all bad these days. I don't know when the news is good, but it's important to think about that. More wonderful things that can be done when we choose love over hate, right? That's what we should keep in mind. At this time, I want to offer an invitation. Anybody who wants to come forward for any reason and want to give your life to Jesus today, if you've been moved by the wisdom and his message, if you want to repent, change your heart towards Jesus, give him your heart, your mind, your soul, and you want to be baptized, then I encourage you to come forward as we stand and we sing.